With the help of some brothers and sisters, this podcast was created to discuss some spiritual topics that you may have questions about. The goal is that you gain a better understanding on the topic, but more importantly, that you grow closer to the Lord. With the help of my little buddy, kick us off.
Stop being cute. Potato!
Welcome to Stop Being a Pew Potato. I'm Josh Hudson, and today I'm with a good friend and buddy, Brian Walsh. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'd like to open up the episode by reading Galatians 1:10. This is the Holman Christian Standard Bible version, and it reads, "For am I now trying to win the favor of people or God? Or am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a slave of Christ." Give us some context.
Yeah, if you think about that situation there, you've got Paul writing to the church, and this was a group of believers that in a lot of ways, they just left. You know, they were converted. If you back up a couple of verses in your reading, Paul has actually mentioned that he's astonished. He's astonished that they have turned away from what they believed. And this is him trying to reason with them, you know, basically say, okay, you got to think about your priorities. You got to think about who you're striving to please right now.
Which kind of brings us to our episode today. We're going to be having conversations surrounding peer pressure. Right from the jump, define peer pressure for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably all have that same thought, and it comes back to when we're young. Yeah, we're young, we're impressionable, and I think a lot of people, even your friends, everyone probably had that same talk with their parents about peer pressure. You know, if somebody at school tells you to do this, you don't have to do it. You know, that's the first thought that jumps into my mind is looking alike, dressing alike, talking alike, sounding alike, you know, things along those lines.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when we think of peer pressure, that being a stage of your life, what we find is that peer pressure doesn't just stop when you're younger, right? Yeah. And I think most people right now are probably replaying some line from either their mom or their dad that went like, you know, if everyone else was going to jump off a bridge, would you go jump off a bridge too? Yep.
And that's the natural inclination. We think back to those young, impressionable days. And what I think is maybe a little bit sobering is that we think that maybe we're past it. We think that, oh, I'm not in school anymore. I'm not young. I'm not impressionable. Peer pressure isn't going to be a big deal for me, but one of the maybe the scariest things about peer pressure is that it changes.
It evolves.
Right. It changes as we get older, and I think now we see it. Okay, it's not a big deal if somebody wants me to watch a movie that I don't want to watch. Well, I'll just tell them no. I'm an adult. But what maybe is more subtle is just that pressure to fit in, and I think that everybody can probably identify with that because we're humans. We want to fit in. We want to be liked. You go back to that verse in Galatians, we want to please people. I don't think I've ever met someone that just wants to alienate people and wants to cause trouble. I think maybe just by nature, we want to reduce tension. We want to fit in, and that's fine, but we can't compromise on spiritual things. We can't compromise on those ideas.
That's what I was going to ask you, is that from what you just said, do you think someone can really fully commit to God if they have one foot in the water and one foot out?
Yeah, and I think that's what that verse in Galatians is talking about, is a lot of times we are pleasing people at the expense of God.
Right.
And it's not just, hey, I want to be nice to the people I work with. I want to be nice to my neighbors. That's all fine and good. But what is maybe a more subtle temptation, especially in our world today, is don't be different. If the whole group thinks this way, you should think this way. If we have all decided, you know, we in quotation marks there, if we have all decided that this is okay, who are you to tell me that it's not okay?
Do you believe that there's times where someone could be successful in life, but they don't want to look different, just kind of like what you're talking about? That maybe they've even been made fun of, and because of that success that they're having, they just stop doing whatever it is altogether because they can't take looking different.
Yeah, I think that's the crazy thing about peer pressure, is that it is, you know, it does not discriminate at all. It affects everybody, regardless of wealth, regardless of status. Here's a fun story for you. In a different life, I would have been Malcolm Gladwell. You know, like if I had known at the age of 16 or 17 or 18 that there were jobs like what Malcolm Gladwell does,
Right.
I would have done everything in my power to do that. But here's an awesome story that I heard from him. You know, if you're thinking about spiritual topics, clearly the first person that comes to mind is Wilt Chamberlain. Not exactly. but here's an interesting story about Wilt. So Wilt Chamberlain, NBA all-timer. You know, I think right now he's in the top 10 in points. I mean, he was the man. For people that are a little bit older than us, probably a little more familiar with Wilt. For our generation, like, he was Shaq.
Right.
You know, just imagine Shaq, but more athletic.
Yeah.
So Wilt Chamberlain, funnily, you know, a lot like Shaq, great around the rim, just absolutely dominant. I mean, he's 7 feet tall, 275 pounds, can't shoot a free throw to save his life. I mean, his career free throw average is 55%. What Wilt is probably the most famous for is that he still holds the record for most points in a game. He had a game where he scored 100 points. So just register that for a second. You know, most NBA games right now, you know, they score 100 points.
Right. And he did it by himself.
This guy scored 100 points by himself.
Yeah.
But here's what's even more remarkable when you know that he was a career 55% free throw shooter, was that on the night that he scores 100, he goes 28 for 32 from the free throw line. So if you're pulling out your phone to do it right now, I'll save you the trouble. It's 88%. He shoots 88% from the free throw line, and it wasn't just some, you know, stroke of luck that came over him. He actually shot his free throws different. He shot his free throws underhanded. We'd probably call it granny style.
Right.
He actually had a teammate that year named Rick Barry, and Rick Barry shot all of his free throws underhanded. Now we could take a super long time and talk about the biomechanics of free throw shooting, which we won't do for the purposes of this. However, just suffice it to say,
that's a different podcast.
That is a different podcast. Tune in later. You'll love it. Underhanded free throw shooting, way more effective. And he proved it. He shot his free throws underhanded, and he shot 88%. So just think about for a second. He could have gone the rest of his career, and instead of shooting 50%, he could have shot 80%. Rick Barry was a career 90% free throw shooter.
Wow.
So for Wilt Chamberlain, I mean, this changes everything. Like, all of a sudden, instead of like hacking the big guy at the end of the game, you're not going to touch him.
Right.
You know, and just think about, I read something one time that said they estimated that just that difference in free throws would have added another 3,000 points.
Wow.
To his career. So for a little bit of context, that jumps him ahead of Michael Jordan on the all-time scoring list. But here's where this kind of all comes back around. He couldn't do it because people made fun of him.
Yeah, he was shooting like a girl.
He was shooting like a girl. He said his direct quote was, "I felt like a sissy." So incredibly wealthy, incredibly talented, 7 foot, 275 pound man felt like a sissy for shooting a free throw underhanded, even though it worked. Even though, like, he had undeniable empirical evidence with his own hands and eyes that it worked, it would have been better for his team, it would have been better for his career. He couldn't do it because other players convinced him that he looked like a sissy. I mean, that's peer pressure right there. That's peer pressure at its finest.
We know what to do because thankfully we have God's inspired word. We know what to do. Our friends may not be doing what we're reading. Our peers, the people we work with, may not be doing the things we're doing. And even though, just like Wilt was winning, he was scoring. That's the game. The game is to win, and he was doing it. He couldn't take it because of the uncomfortable nature of shooting like a sissy.
Shooting like a sissy, yeah.
We do the same thing. It could be just talking different, dressing different for women. They deal with that. Anything you want to add? Well,
even just thinking different. You think about a lot of the issues that are going on, you know, around the world in our country today. Christians just have a different approach. You know, we think differently because we use the Bible as our standard. So if the rest of the world has deemed this okay, you know, the rest of the world has said you should accept this. If that comes into contradiction with the Bible, that's our metric for decision making. And so when we go to the Bible and say, it's not there, I can't find support for this, therefore I think it's wrong, we're immediately different. You know,
right.
We have a different thought process from really a lot of the other people we interact with.
I'd like to focus on two different ways where we can be impacted by peer pressure. The first one that I want to talk to you about is the impact felt on our immediate circle that surrounds us. What would you consider someone's immediate circle?
I always go back. I think I heard this quote forever ago, and it's been repeated by lots of different people. Tim Ferriss talks a lot about it. It'll pop up in a bunch of different books. I think it was first attributed to Jim Rohn, but he said, you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And that's not a hard and fast number, but in a lot of cases, if you sit down and you think about it, there are probably about 5 people that you spend a lot more time with than anybody else.
I think that most people right now are thinking about the 5 people.
Yeah. I hope you are. That's the whole point of this, is you probably think about the 5 people that you talk to the most, the people that you interact with the most, the people that you choose to spend your time with. And those are the people that are going to have a great impact on you. You are going to, just by nature, you're going to think about things. Oh, because this guy, my friend at work, talked about it. My spouse talked about it. I'm reading this book because my friend recommended this book. I went to go see this movie because the people in my circle, they just have a huge impact on the things that we think about, talk about, and do because of the vast amount of time that we spend with them.
Should we strategically, pick the people that are 5 people?
Yeah, I think we absolutely need to. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people just don't really think about who they spend time with. Hopefully you put some thought into your spouse if you're married.
Oh, yeah.
But outside of that, sometimes relationships just happen organically. And I'm not saying they shouldn't. But a lot of times relationships just kind of happen. And it's like, oh, well, I spend time with this person because we work together and we just kind of clicked.
Right.
Or we've got a class together and we just kind of clicked. But I just want us to view those relationships for the Christian through the lens of eternity. And if you thought about those 5 people, I would encourage you to write those 5 people down and just ask yourself, is everybody on this list helping me get to heaven?
Amen.
And that's really what it comes down to is, we can have people that we click with on almost every level. They're fun to be around. We have an easy time talking to them, but we should be focused on getting to heaven. You go back to Galatians. Are we trying to please people or God? Mm. And I think so many times we just associate with people because, we like the same sports team. They're a cool guy. They're a cool girl, whatever the case may be. We have to start viewing these decisions when we know how much they impact our soul through that lens of eternity.
You had mentioned this thought, and I want to just ask you, should we have friends that challenge us or just accept us?
Well, I think the answer is both. If you want people, and probably we all tend to lean a little more towards those that accept us. There's an old line, you want friends that are going to accept you the way you are. And I would quibble with that a little bit. You want people that like you.
Yeah.
You don't just want to be around somebody that badgers you, because think about the idea of peer pressure. They can lead you down a road you don't need to go down. But I also think we want to be around people that are going to challenge us to be better. It's one of my favorite examples from the Bible. You think about in Galatians chapter 2, where Paul confronted Peter.
Right.
And we don't have a whole lot of insight into, the friendship between Paul and Peter, if there was one. We know that later on, Paul speaks in high terms of Peter. But you think about that situation in Galatians chapter 2, where Peter wasn't doing what he needed to. There was a situation where Peter was actually playing a little bit of the hypocrite, and Paul called him out on it. And that may be a really tough thing. I'm sure that was a really uncomfortable thing. But we need to have people in our life, and I would submit to you, we need to have people in our 5 that are capable of doing that.
Right. I think that, if someone's listening right now and they're thinking about this really for the first time, then maybe you should really consider who is in your top 5. By the way, was there a T-Mobile commercial with Fave 5?
Yes. In fact, there absolutely was. It had Dwayne Wade and Charles Barkley.
So when you talk about that, and I don't mean to go there, but you think about your Fave 5. That's what they called it, right?
Yeah. Now, a lot of people that are listening to this probably don't remember, but there was a time, and it was a magical time, and it was called the late 90s. You actually had to pay for minutes to talk to someone else. You could not. Now, no, if you're younger, if you're like younger than 30, this may be rocking your world right now. But you had to pay for minutes. You also had to pay for texts. You had to choose your text, and so that's where this came along. This was a game changer. But T-Mobile came along and they said, guess what? You can pick 5 people, and you can talk to them for as long as you want, anytime. it was a game changer.
You mentioned to me that in our world, sometimes our 5 may not always be people.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we live in Middle Tennessee. There are a lot of people that we both know that probably commute to Nashville. Nashville is 23 miles away. During rush hour, it might as well be 2,300 miles away. It takes like an hour and a half to get to Nashville. And we know people that drive back and forth to Nashville every day. And I would want you to think about this, that if you are spending 3 hours in the car, and if you're listening to something for 3 hours, that might be one of your 5.
No, I agree. What are you flooding your mind with?
Yeah. If you're in a situation where you commute, or if you regularly, the screen time feature on Apple is pretty powerful.
Oh man, it's very insightful.
Yes. So if you look at your screen time and you realize that you spend more time with your screen than maybe you spend with who you think is one of your friends
or your spouse.
Yikes. But if you are spending hours a week with a thing, that might be one of your 5. And so it's not, like I said, the commute isn't something you can really change, but my whole point behind this is to be intentional about it.
It is true that whatever you're flooding your mind with, you bring that up in conversations.
Yeah.
So for both of us at one point in our life, we probably were thinking about sports all the time. We knew so much because of what we listened to. At some point, you have to shift gears and flood your mind with things that are better than the world's got to offer.
Yeah.
So listening to the Bible app as you drive down the road, just listen to the Word. Those kind of listen to songs,
listening to podcasts.
Good plug there. Really helps you out, because if you're consumed with that, you're thinking about that all the time. You're more prone to have a conversation with someone that you might not have been bold enough to do before.
Yeah.
Let's flip this around. Even if you surround yourself with others that are spiritually minded, you can get caught up in riding their spiritual coattails. You brought this to my attention. What do you mean by that altogether, as far as riding on their spiritual coattails?
So I think in some ways there can actually be, I don't know if I even hesitate to use this phrase, like a good form of peer pressure. Right. And that's great. Like, we want to surround ourselves. So you think about your 5, you want to surround yourself with really strong spiritual people. And if you're surrounding yourself with strong spiritual people, you're going to be talking about spiritual things. Hopefully your conversations, your thoughts, your actions are all going to be Christ-centered. But I think there can also be a danger there in that if everyone else is talking about spiritual things and they're talking about their daily Bible reading and everything, you can get caught up basically, riding that wave and not focusing on yourself. So for example, say you've got friends at church, and they're always talking about all the things that they're reading. If they're talking about their daily Bible reading, they're talking about a book or a devotional or something they're listening to, that's great, but you need to be doing that too. And sometimes I think it's easy, if we surround ourselves with good people, to maybe lose a little bit of sight on what we are doing and think that we're just going to kind of catch this secondhand spirituality. And there are good effects. We absolutely want to be around good people, but I just want to make sure that we don't let being around good people think that we're about to punch our ticket to heaven. Right. We have to be focused on ourselves.
What I would say to that is, don't put yourself in a position to lie to your brothers and sisters either. It's peer pressure.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So just like you may, fall into whatever temptation or do whatever that you're feeling that's worldly, the same could be said for the spiritual things as well. That if you're talking about what you're reading, I could just act like I'm reading the same thing.
Yeah, I'm reading James too. It's a great study right now.
So the unfortunate thing is, although we're talking about spiritual things, I'm lying.
Right.
And I'm still sinning.
Right. But I've got this peer pressure to fit in.
Right.
I've got this desire to want to fit in with good people, and so we feel that pull to want to do the things that they're doing. We just have to make sure that we're actually doing them.
Yeah, that's what I want to get from this, is that it is very important to put us around people that we're going to succeed, that we want to be like, especially someone who's being a rock star within the church. You want to be like them. Maybe that's a terrible way of putting that. But if I'm just giving them lip service and I'm lying to them,
Philippians 2, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, it is our own salvation. And on the judgment day, we're not going to be able to use anybody else's salvation. We're not going to be able to use our parents, our friends, our spouses. We're going to have to answer for our actions.
That's right. Yeah, this idea of someone saying that they are a 3rd or 4th generation Christian, that means nothing. Yeah. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. That's great that your family is hard workers for the kingdom. And it's great that you were blessed enough that you were underneath them and you learned things from your parents and your grandparents and their parents. But you got to do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. They can put us in a position to succeed. We have to be the one to do it, though.
Yep. I'd like for you to read James 5, starting in verse 16, and just read that for us.
Confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much.
So from that, we know what we're supposed to do. Why do you think that people can't admit things to each other? As a man, it's very prideful. I don't want you to know what I'm battling, the temptations that I'm faced with, or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's an element of pride. I also think that sometimes when you see other people that you perceive as strong, you just assume that they can't identify with me.
Oh, that's true.
You know, I see somebody else, and we've talked about this. You know, we talked about this before. You see someone else, and you're like, man, they're cruising. You know, they are cruising. They have got it figured out, and they're not going to be able to understand where I'm coming from with my shortcoming. They're not going to be able to understand my sin, and so even if they wanted to help me, you know, they're not going to be able to understand where I'm coming from. They're not going to be able to provide good advice. They've probably never struggled with this in their life. And so it just almost puts up this stumbling block where we don't even feel like we're good enough to bring our sin to them. You know, we don't even feel like we're good enough to go to our brother because, man, they're flying high. They're cruising. You know, they've probably never dealt with what I'm dealing with.
I would like to say that if we can't tell our brothers what's going on, how in the world are we going to tell God?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when you talk about if that's your mindset toward just another man, another flawed human being, how do you bring your problems before the creator of the earth?
Right. I think that's one thing that a lot of us have to just figure out how to do.
Yeah. I think you can see other people that are doing really well, and you can lose sight of yourself. And you can see people that are growing by leaps and bounds in their faith. And again, that whole idea of, you know, secondhand spirituality, you can feel like you're growing along with them. But one of the great things about 2 Corinthians 13:5 is that it just hits you. It says, listen, examine yourself, test yourself. You know, I mentioned earlier going down and writing down your 5 and asking, are these people getting me to heaven? You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, basically taking an honest evaluation of yourself and asking yourself, you know, am I a better Christian, you know, in January of 2019 than I was in January of 2018?
I would say on the flip side of that, what are you doing for those people as well?
Yeah, exactly. You know, who are you in your 5? You know, you're surrounding yourself with good people, but are you the kind of person that is able to accept and challenge? You know, are you the kind of person that makes yourself open to someone else who may be struggling?
Right. This is a personal question. Do you pray for your 5?
Yeah, no, I think I do. And I could obviously do a much better job, because a lot of times it's when somebody has brought me something. You know, if it's a good friend, we've had a long conversation, and I can tell that something's weighing on him, whether he mentioned it to me specifically or not. But a lot of times it's when I've talked to that person. You know, I've gotten off the phone with them, I've talked to them. You know, we've kind of done the life update, we've shared things with each other, and I prayed for that individual. What I probably could do a much better job of is being proactive.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A lot of times when people pray about things, they already get to a certain point where they have to. They're on their knees at this point. We can pray before that point.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about when you're faced with sin or if you're really struggling with things. Your friends too.
Yeah.
If we're thinking about them and praying for them, then we're going to be more prompt to help them.
Mm-hmm. And I think also if you're praying for them, they're on your mind proactively, and maybe I can actually take some steps to reach out to them.
Right.
You know, so it's not just oh, hey, you know, my friend called me the other day. You know, it sounds like him and his wife are going through some rough times. We should really pray for him. Maybe if I was praying for him on my own, I would have thought about him 2 weeks ago, and I would have proactively reached out to him.
Have you ever had a friend who just said, and I know we're kind of going off here, but just texted you or called you and said, how are you doing spiritually, if they knew you weren't where you should be? And if you have, how did that make you feel?
I've had someone that asked me, and it caught me off guard. That's how I felt at the time. He asked me how I was doing spiritually, and you know, we had a great relationship. You know, we've been friends for a long time, but you know, we had all the stuff that we talked about. Like we had our circle of stuff. Like, oh, we talk about sports, we talk about this, we talk about this, and then he just asked me, he's like, how are things going? And I started responding with, oh yeah, this is what's going on with the family. And he's like, how are things going? How are things going spiritually? And if I remember right, I just stopped.
Yeah.
It took me a second because I was like, it's sad, but I probably haven't thought about how I'm doing spiritually in days or weeks. And it was a great reminder. It was a great reminder, and not that necessarily anything was going bad, but it was a good reminder for me that I probably needed to be doing more good.
Yeah, I've been asked the same question only by one person. It was a really close friend. It was a gut punch.
Yeah.
From that, now that I'm older, I think it's very important that you're at that level with a friend. Because if you love someone, you're going to check in on them, and you're going to call them out when they need it.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's a pew potato, you need to let them know. And you need to do everything you can, whether it be praying before conversations take place or whatever, but just getting in their face and letting them know that you see it.
Yeah.
How can we improve, or can we improve, for the folks who are dealing with this kind of peer pressure that we've talked about in general?
One of the things that comes to mind is it's just being intentional with who you surround yourself with. I recognize there are a host of people that you do not get to pick. You do not get to pick a lot of times who you work with. If you're in school, you don't get to pick who your professors are or who your classmates are. There are a lot of other people that we do pick. And we need to be really intentional with the people that we pick to be in our lives, because they're going to have such a huge impact on us. And that's probably my first thing, is just taking something that a lot of times is just an organic, it kind of happened, and putting a lot of thought into it. The other thing I think we need to realize is I think we have to kind of call out peer pressure for what it is. And that this whole temptation to just go with the flow, that this whole thing to just kind of conform to the group thing, that's dangerous. And it is easy to take the path of least resistance. We have to be willing to, push back on that when we know it's right, because the stakes are our soul.
The idea in 1 Peter 2:9, it says in there that we are his own special people. We're going to be different. If we're like Matthew 5:16, if we're in the light, we're going to be different.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting about that is we are different, not just to be different. It's not that we want to cause a problem. It's not that we want to make somebody feel uncomfortable just to feel uncomfortable. We are different because God designed us to be different. The whole idea of being sanctified is to be set apart. And so we can't have a mindset that we are going to be like everybody we encounter. God is holy, so we should be holy. And if we are going to be holy, that means that we are going to be sanctified. We are going to be set apart. There is always going to be a difference between the person that wants to please God versus the person that wants to please others.
What I was going to say about 1 Peter 2:9 is that for the longest time, I read peculiar and I just thought, well, I don't want to be weird. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be different than the world. And I didn't know what you just said of how special that really is.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of being weird.
Yeah. Well, I think you go back to that passage in 2 Corinthians where it talks about testing yourself. And one of the elements of testing yourself is really clarifying what your priorities are. And a lot of times we say, my priority is this, my priority is to serve God. But what do our actions show? Our actions show that we care more about fitting in. And think about Wilt. Wilt said he wanted to be the best NBA player of all time, but his actions showed he cared more about what people thought. And we have to adopt that mindset that we are so laser focused on our priority of serving God and getting to heaven that we want to be who he called us to be.
Well, man, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you letting me come up to your place and record an episode with me.
I loved it. I had a blast. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. You can help us out by giving us a review and clicking subscribe. Have a great day and God bless.